All right, so are you ready to dive into this?
Huh.
We're tackling the 2024 GOP platform. We're all about giving you the need to know, cutting through the jargon.
Absolutely. It's like we've done all the homework so you don't have to.
Exactly. So, expert speaker, you've had a first look at all this. What's the big picture? What's the Make America Great Again message this time?
Well, it's pretty clear from the get-go that they're saying America's facing some major challenges.
Okay, like what?
They're talking about declining national power, economic uncertainty, threats both inside and outside the U.S. It's definitely a call to action, a push to return to a time they see as stronger, more prosperous.
Right, that whole Make America Great Again idea is back. So how do they plan on actually tackling these challenges? What are the big promises they're making?
Well, they've laid out 20 key promises.
20. Okay, so what are the ones everyone's talking about?
One that really jumps out is their approach to immigration. They're calling for sealing the border and the largest deportation program in history.
Whoa, okay. That's a pretty big statement.
Yeah, they're talking about military deployments, a full-on naval blockade to combat fentanyl trafficking. It goes way beyond just building a wall.
Wow, that paints a pretty intense picture. What kind of impact could that have if they actually did all that?
It would be a massive change from what's happening now. They're directly linking what they call a migrant invasion to issues like crime, drugs, a shaky economy. They're saying this level of action is basically unavoidable.
So it's like their solution to a whole bunch of problems.
Exactly. But the impact, it wouldn't just be about immigration patterns. Think about international relations, trade, even just the lives of everyday people who get caught in the middle of all this.
It really makes you think about the human cost, for sure. And they're not shying away from those hot-button issues either, like education, universal school choice, getting rid of teacher tenure. They even want to abolish the Department of Education altogether.
It's definitely a total overhaul of how education works in the U.S., how it's structured, how it's funded. They're saying this will give more control to parents, make schools compete to be better, and ultimately be better for students.
It's like a pretty radical change.
It is, and of course you have critics who are worried about this actually making inequality worse and really weakening public schools overall.
Yeah, it's a big gamble, right? Big potential rewards, but some big risks too. And speaking of gambles, let's talk about the economy. They want to make those Trump tax cuts permanent and even lower taxes on tips. I bet our listeners in the service industry are interested in that one.
Definitely.
On top of that, there's a huge focus on deregulation, boosting American manufacturing. They've definitely got a plan, that's for sure.
Yeah, their whole economic policy is all about the idea that less government, less taxes, fewer regulations means more economic growth that benefits everyone. And they're really pushing this idea of fair trade and bringing back manufacturing jobs to make America a stronger competitor globally.
So it's like a more self-reliant, industry-focused America they're going for. It's an interesting idea, but how realistic is it to pull off, especially now in today's global economy? Could we really become the world's top energy producer again?
That's the million-dollar question. This platform really emphasizes getting to energy dominance, mostly through producing more oil, natural gas, and coal here in the U.S.
Okay, so less reliance on other countries for energy. Got it.
Right. They're saying this will make energy cheaper here, and of course, mean we depend less on foreign energy sources. But one big concern from critics is what this means for the environment, especially when you're talking about climate change. It's a tough balance to strike, for sure. And speaking of balancing acts, their plan for overhauling the government, that's another area where you see this tension between their goals and what could actually happen. They're taking aim at what they call woke government censorship, even have plans for Washington, D.C.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
What exactly do they mean by woke government? How are they planning to actually tackle that?
Well, the platform doesn't give a specific definition. But if you look at their other ideas and what they're saying, it seems like they're targeting those policies and programs about diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice. Think things like diversity training in government or funding for programs trying to fix inequality.
So are they basically saying the government should just stay out of these social issues, leave it up to individuals and communities?
That's one way to see it. Their argument is that these are things best handled at the individual and community level, not by the federal government. They connect this to their stance on free speech, saying these woke policies shut down different viewpoints and could even lead to censorship.
And this ties back into their whole thing about education, right?
Yeah,
Challenging things like critical race theory and what they call radical gender ideology in schools.
exactly. It's all connected to this bigger critique of what they see as a left-leaning cultural agenda being pushed by institutions like government, education, even the media.
And they're not just talking about changing policies. They're talking about the people involved, too. They want to get rid of officials they see as part of this woke bureaucracy. Sounds like they're planning a major shakeup of the entire federal government.
You got it. They've promised to hold accountable anyone they think has abused their power. They even mentioned possibly investigating and prosecuting political opponents.
Whoa. Okay, hold on a second. Investigating and prosecuting their opponents. That's a bold move.
It is. They also want to declassify government records and remove corrupt employees, though it's not exactly clear who they consider corrupt.
Yeah, that's a bit vague. And speaking of bold statements, they also want to make Washington, D.C. the safest and most beautiful capital city. How are they planning on doing that?
Their plan is to have the federal government take more control over D.C. It's a self-governing district right now. But they believe this is what's needed to bring back law and order, specifically mentioning crime and homelessness.
Interesting. So less freedom for D.C., more control from the federal government.
Yeah.
What are the implications of that? How could all these changes to the government affect the average American?
That's the big question, right? If they actually do all of this, the consequences could be huge. We could see a major shift in what the federal government does and how much power it has, especially when it comes to things like social programs, education, and cultural issues.
And obviously, saying they might investigate or prosecute their political opponents raises some red flags about potential abuse of power and further dividing the country.
Absolutely. And it's really important to remember that a lot of these ideas would probably face legal challenges and a lot of opposition. So how this would actually play out in the real world is still up in the air.
It seems like this all comes back to this idea of a fight for the heart of America, two very different visions of what the country is and should be.
Exactly. And it's up to each person to decide where they stand on these issues and what kind of future they want for the country.
Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit and talk about their foreign policy stance, because there's a lot to unpack there. Seems like they want a pretty big change in how America deals with the rest of the world.
Yeah, a big chunk of the platform is dedicated to their approach to foreign policy. The big idea is peace through strength.
Peace through strength. Okay, I've heard that before. So what makes their approach different?
They want to modernize the military, strengthen alliances, counter China, defeat terrorism, and revitalize the defense industrial base.
So basically they're saying a strong military is key to keeping peace and protecting American interests both here and abroad. It's a familiar idea, but they seem to be taking it to a whole new level. Like they're calling for an Iron Dome missile defense shield over the entire country.
Yeah, that's definitely an attention-grabbing image. For a lot of people, they might not even realize that the Iron Dome is a system that's already been used in combat. Developed in Israel, it's designed to shoot down short-range rockets and artillery shells. The platform says this shield, along with increased military spending and a more assertive foreign policy, is what's needed to deter adversaries like China and other threats.
And speaking of China, they're definitely taking a hard line on them, even going so far as to say they want to revoke China's most favored nation trading status. That's a big deal.
It is. They see China as a major threat to America's economy and national security. They're calling for a decoupling of the two economies and a much tougher stance on trade and diplomacy. Essentially, they want America to be less dependent on China economically.
So their whole foreign policy strategy is a pretty big departure from how the current administration's handling things. They're arguing that America needs to reclaim its spot as a global superpower, both militarily and economically.
Absolutely. The platform keeps emphasizing that America has lost its standing in the world, and they're proposing a more aggressive, less compromising approach to get that strength back.
And it's not just about military power either. They want to revitalize American industry, especially in sectors they consider vital for national security.
Exactly. They argue that relying on other countries for essential goods and materials makes America less safe and less economically independent. Policies that encourage companies to produce things here, especially in areas like defense manufacturing and critical technologies.
It's very much a Made in America strategy for both domestic and foreign policy. But how would all of this affect the average American? What are the potential upsides and downsides of this peace through strength plan?
That's a tough question with no easy answers. The platform claims that a strong military and a strong industrial base are essential for preventing wars and protecting American interests, which they say will ultimately make the country safer and more prosperous. But critics worry that this focus on military might could actually make things more tense, potentially starting expensive arms races and maybe even leading to war.
And then there's the potential economic impact to think about traditure. Switching to more domestic production and separating our economy from China's could mean higher prices for consumers and maybe even disruptions to global trade.
You're right. Those are all important things to consider when you're trying to figure out what could happen with this foreign policy vision.
It's a lot to take in. We're basically talking about changing the very foundation of how America interacts with the rest of the world.
Exactly. What they're presenting is a vision of an America that's more assertive, less willing to compromise an America that puts its own interests first.
Right.
Whether voters will buy into that and whether it actually becomes policy, well,
Mhm.
we'll have to wait and see.
And that brings us to another really important part of their platform, their stance on government accountability and election integrity. That's been a pretty hot topic lately.
That's right. It's a big one. Election integrity is a huge focus in this platform. They're proposing a whole bunch of measures, all aimed at, as they put it, securing elections.
Okay, so let's break it down. What are they actually talking about doing?
Well, they want to do a few things. For one, they want to make voter ID a requirement everywhere.
Okay, so everyone would need ID to vote.
Exactly. And they want to transition to what they call highly sophisticated paper ballots nationwide. Plus, they want to require proof of citizenship to even register to vote, and they're pushing for a move to same-day voting.
So it sounds like they're trying to make it harder for people to vote illegally, which they claim is a big problem, but then also easier to vote legally by having everything happen on one day.
That's exactly how they're presenting it. Their argument is that these steps will help people trust elections again, which they say has been eroded because of widespread fraud.
But there's been a lot of debate about that, right?
Oh, absolutely. Critics say these measures are actually meant to make it harder for certain groups to vote, especially those who tend to vote for Democrats.
Right, because things like needing ID or proof of citizenship can disproportionately disenfranchise certain groups, like low-income voters, minority voters, or even elderly voters who might have trouble getting those documents.
Exactly. And then there's the whole debate about whether these measures even actually work to stop fraud, which studies have shown is incredibly rare in U.S. elections.
It seems like a really tough issue, with both sides saying the other is trying to rig the system in their favor.
Absolutely. It's really tied up in partisan politics, and it's important to look at these proposals critically. We have to think about how they might affect both voter access and the integrity of our elections.
It's about finding that balance, isn't it? We all want elections to be fair and secure, but there's no easy answer on how to get there.
You've got it. It's complicated, and honestly, it'll probably be a central issue in politics for a long time to come.
It definitely seems that way. Wow, we've gone through a lot today. From immigration to the economy, education, government reforms, foreign policy, even how we run our elections.
This platform really covers just about every major issue America's facing right now.
It's a bold vision, no doubt, and it's deeply rooted in a very specific way of seeing the world. The platform really pushes this idea that America is at a turning point, that to really thrive again, it needs to go back to its core values and principles.
And these 20 promises, they're basically the roadmap to get to that greatness, to use their word.
Exactly. They're presenting a stark choice, a clear alternative to what they see as the failures of the current administration and the dangers of staying on the same path.
It's a call to action for anyone who feels like America has lost its way, that it needs to return to some kind of former glory.
And it's a message that's going to resonate with a lot of people, especially those who feel forgotten by how things are right now, or those who miss a time when America's place as a global leader was unquestioned. It's powerful stuff, no question about it. But, like with any political platform, the devil is in the details. How these proposals would actually work in practice, what unexpected consequences might pop up, and whether they actually make life better for all Americans. Well, those are all questions for another day.
You said it. And that's what makes these deep dives so important. It's not just about understanding what they're proposing, but also thinking critically about how those proposals might affect our lives, our communities, our country.
Because no matter what side of the aisle you're on, no one can deny that these ideas could dramatically change America as we know it.
And with this crucial election coming up, understanding these proposals and what they might mean is more important now than ever.
Well said. Expert speaker, thank you so much for helping us navigate all of this. It's been incredibly insightful.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next episode, where we'll unpack another important issue shaping our world. Until then, stay curious, stay engaged.